There are seasons in life when the soul feels as though it has been abandoned in a wilderness too vast to cross and too silent to understand. A man wakes in the morning carrying burdens he cannot name. A woman kneels beside her bed with tears she no longer explains because she has grown weary even of describing her sorrow. There are nights when the heavens appear shut like iron gates, and prayers seem to rise no higher than the ceiling before falling back upon the heart that uttered them. In such hours, many begin to wonder whether suffering is merely chaos wearing a dark robe, whether pain has any meaning at all, or whether the wounds of life are only cruel accidents scattered across human existence without design or mercy. Yet there is a mystery hidden within suffering that the world rarely understands. Pain is not always the evidence of God's absence. Sometimes it is the evidence of his deepest work. The farmer cuts the ground before the harvest appears. The sculptor strikes the stone before beauty emerges from it. Gold enters the furnace looking ordinary, but it leaves bearing a radiance that could not have been born any other way. And the soul, too, often passes through fire before it begins to shine with eternal strength. Many people desire victory, but few understand the road upon which victory travels. They imagine triumph arriving like sunlight upon a summer field, gentle and immediate. But more often, victory comes clothed in scars. It arrives after sleepless nights, after betrayals, after unanswered questions, after doors have closed and hopes have withered. God does not merely hand a crown to a man who has never fought a battle. He shapes the soul through the battle itself. The struggle is not separate from the victory. In ways too deep for human wisdom, the struggle becomes the very instrument through which victory is born. There are wounds you carry now that you once begged heaven to remove immediately. There were moments you pleaded for escape, moments you asked why life had become so unbearably heavy. Yet perhaps if those burdens had vanished the instant you requested it, you would never have discovered the strength hidden inside you. Perhaps you would never have learned how deeply God could sustain a trembling heart. We often pray for comfort while God is building courage. We ask for ease while he is preparing endurance. We desire immediately rescue while he is crafting a spirit capable of surviving storms that once would have destroyed us. The soul grows strangely in darkness. A tree whose roots never reach through difficult soil remains fragile when strong winds arrive. But the tree forced to search through hard ground develops roots that cling with astonishing power. In the same way, suffering drives the heart deeper. It teaches a person to seek eternal things instead of temporary applause. It strips away illusions. It exposes false securities. It reveals how little earthly comforts can truly save us. And when every lesser support has fallen away, the soul discovers that God himself is enough. There are people listening even now who have spent years carrying disappointments they cannot explain to anyone around them. Others see their smile but not their silent grief. Others hear their laughter but not the ache hidden beneath it. Some have endured rejection so many times that they have begun to believe they were born merely to be overlooked. Some have fought battles within their minds so exhausting that they wake tired before the day even begins. Some have stood beside graves wondering how life could continue after. Our loss tore their world apart. Some have prayed for restoration while watching everything around them collapse piece by piece. But hear this carefully. Your suffering has not been wasted. Heaven wastes nothing. The tears you cried in secret were seen. The prayers whispered through trembling lips were heard. The nights when you felt abandoned were not empty moments drifting unnoticed through eternity. God was present even there, especially there. There are works of grace accomplished in hidden valleys that could never be achieved upon bright mountaintops. The human heart often misunderstands divine timing because we judge events according to immediate comfort rather than eternal purpose. We think delay means denial. We think silence means abandonment. Yet many times God is arranging matters beyond our sight. A seed buried beneath the earth appears forgotten, but beneath the soil invisible transformation is taking place. Roots are forming before branches emerge. Life is developing before fruit appears. And many souls abandon hope simply because they mistake hidden preparation for permanent defeat. What if the season you called destruction was actually preparation? What if the closing doors protected you from paths that would have wounded you more deeply later? What if the loneliness taught you to hear God's voice more clearly than the noise of crowds ever allowed? Human beings often cling desperately to things too small for their destiny. We mourn the loss of what God removed because we cannot yet see what he intends to replace it with. There are chapters in life when everything familiar begins to shake. Friendships fade. Opportunities disappear. Plans collapse unexpectedly, and in those moments fear whispers that all is lost. Yet sometimes God permits lesser things to fall apart because they cannot accompany you into the future He is preparing. A child cannot remain forever within the walls of childhood if he is to become a man. Growth always requires leaving something behind. Transformation always involves discomfort. Resurrection itself came only after crucifixion. The strange truth about suffering is that it reveals what prosperity often conceals. Easy seasons can make people forgetful. Comfort can lull the soul into sleep, but hardship awakens eternity within us. It reminds us how fragile earthly things truly are. It teaches us that human strength alone is insufficient. It compels us to look upward, and when a man finally reaches the end of his own power, he often discovers the beginning of God's strength. There are victories being prepared for you now that you cannot yet imagine. Not every victory looks like wealth or applause or public recognition. Some victories are quieter and infinitely more valuable. The anxious soul finds peace again. The broken heart learns how to hope again. The person who once feared tomorrow begins walking forward with confidence. The wounded spirit discovers joy returning unexpectedly like sunlight after a long winter. These are miracles too. Indeed, they may be the greatest miracles of all. God is not merely interested in changing your circumstances. He desires to transform you. Circumstances alone can shift temporarily while the heart remains unchanged. But when God truly works within a soul, He creates strength where weakness once ruled, wisdom where confusion once reigned, and courage where fear once held dominion. The greatest evidence of divine power is not always a changed situation. Sometimes it is a changed person standing in the middle of the same situation with unshakable faith. There are many who would never seek God if life always unfolded according to their plans. Success can make people self-sufficient, but suffering exposes our need. It breaks the illusion that we control our own destiny. It humbles the soul. And humility, though painful to obtain, opens the heart to grace. Pride builds walls. Humility opens doors. Often the deepest spiritual awakenings are born from seasons that felt unbearable while we endured them. One day you may look back upon this painful chapter and realize that what nearly broke you actually became the turning point of your life. The betrayal taught discernment. The failure produced wisdom. The waiting developed patience. The loneliness deepened your dependence upon God. The disappointment purified your desires. The storm strengthened your faith. You may one day thank God for prayers He did not answer in the way you once demanded because His wisdom saw beyond the narrow horizon visible to human understanding. It is difficult for the soul to believe this while standing inside the storm itself. Pain narrows vision. Grief clouds perspective. Fear whispers lies that sound convincing in dark moments. The enemy of hope always attempts to persuade suffering hearts that their current season will last forever. But seasons change. Winter never reigns eternally. Night eventually surrenders to dawn. And there are moments ordained by heaven when God suddenly shifts what seemed immovable. Some of the greatest changes in life begin invisibly. Before rivers overflow the land, rain first falls quietly upon distant mountains. Before dawn colors the sky, the earth remains dark for hours. Before chains break outwardly, freedom often begins inwardly. God frequently works beneath the surface long before visible transformation appears. That is why faith matters so deeply. Faith is trusting that unseen movement is taking place even when circumstances appear unchanged. There are blessings approaching your life that your current pain has prepared you to handle wisely. Had they arrived earlier, you might have misused them or failed to appreciate them. Sometimes God delays certain gifts because the soul itself must mature first. A man handed authority before developing character may destroy himself with it. A woman granted influence before gaining wisdom may become consumed by pride. Preparation often feels frustrating because we mistake it for punishment. Yet divine preparation is mercy in disguise. You are not the same person you were before the struggle began. Even now, though weary, you are stronger than you realize. You have survived days you once believed impossible to endure. You have carried burdens that would have crushed an earlier version of yourself. You have learned how to keep walking while your heart was breaking. And though you may not yet see it clearly, resilience has been forming within you like steel forged through fire. The world teaches people to avoid suffering at all costs, but heaven sometimes uses suffering as a sacred instrument. Not because God delights in human pain, but because he sees what pain can produce when surrendered into his hands. A shallow soul may remain comfortable, but it rarely becomes profound. Deep compassion is often born from deep wounds. The people who carry the greatest light frequently pass through the darkest valleys. Those who comfort others most tenderly are often those who once cried alone in silence. There are prayers you prayed years ago whose answers are only now beginning to unfold. Human beings desire immediate conclusions, yet God often writes stories slowly. We see isolated pages while he sees the entire book. We panic over single chapters while he already knows the ending. And because we cannot yet see the complete design, we sometimes accuse him of forgetting us when he is actually weaving together a future more meaningful than we could have imagined. The enemy wants you to interpret your suffering as proof of defeat. God intends for it to become proof of transformation. There is a vast difference between those two things. Defeat leaves a soul empty. Transformation leaves it refined. Defeat destroys hope. Transformation purifies hope. And though the process may look similar from the outside, the outcome is entirely different. One ends in despair. The other ends in glory. Even now, something is shifting, not merely around you, but within you. The heart that once trembled constantly is beginning to stand more firmly. The faith that once felt fragile is becoming rooted more deeply. The person who once depended entirely upon visible evidence is learning how to trust even in uncertainty. And this inward transformation matters because outward victory without inward renewal can never truly satisfy the soul. There are ns breaking that you cannot yet fully perceive. Old fears are losing their power. Old lies are weakening. Old wounds are beginning to heal beneath the surface. God often starts restoration invisibly because lasting change begins in hidden places. A foundation is laid underground before a great building rises above the earth. Likewise, heaven establishes strength within the soul before revealing the full measure of victory outwardly. The suffering season did not come to destroy your destiny. It came to refine it. And though you may still feel weary from the journey, though questions may still linger within your heart, though answers may not yet appear as quickly as you hoped, there is already movement taking place beyond what your eyes can presently see. The very pain that once convinced you life was ending may soon become the testimony that reveals how powerfully God was working all along. For there are moments when the soul stands upon the edge of surrender, not because it no longer believes in God, but because it has grown exhausted from waiting. Waiting can weary a person more deeply than labor itself. To struggle for a short season is one thing, to endure uncertainty for a year is another. Many can survive pain if they know precisely when it will end. But when the road stretches endlessly before them and no clear answer appears, the heart begins to ache with a different kind of sorrow. It is the sorrow of wondering whether heaven still remembers their name. Yet, some of the most sacred work God performs within a human life happens during these long seasons of waiting. Waiting exposes what hurried blessings often conceal. It reveals whether faith depends merely upon visible rewards or whether it can survive even in silence. A faith that survives only when miracles appear immediately is still fragile, but a faith that continues walking through unanswered questions becomes something unshakable. It develops roots beneath the surface that storms cannot easily uproot. There are people who once believed their suffering meant they were being punished, when in truth they were being prepared. They interpreted delay as rejection when heaven was actually preserving them for the right moment. Human beings are creatures of immediacy. We wish to arrive before we have learned the lessons necessary for the destination. We desire elevation before character has matured enough to sustain it. Yet God sees beyond the temporary emotions of the moment. He knows what the future requires of you. He knows the weight of the calling ahead. And because he knows, he sometimes permits difficult seasons to shape capacities within you that easier days never could. A sword is not formed through comfort. It is thrust repeatedly into fire and hammered again and again until strength is forged into its very structure. And though the soul is far more precious than metal, its shaping often follows a similar pattern. There are truths you only learn in hardship. There are depths of compassion that only suffering can awaken. There are revelations about God that cannot be understood merely through sermons or books. They are discovered in hospital rooms, in sleepless nights, in lonely apartments, in moments when tears become prayers, because words themselves have failed. Many imagine spiritual maturity as a serene and effortless thing, but true maturity often carries scars. The deepest believers are rarely those who have avoided pain altogether. More often they are those who walked through devastation and somehow discovered that God remained faithful even there. Their fate. H is no longer built merely upon pleasant emotions or favorable outcomes. It is anchored in something eternal. They have learned that God's presence does not disappear simply because circumstances grow dark. There are times when God allows the foundations of earthly security to shake so that the soul may discover a foundation that cannot be shaken. Careers fail, relationships fracture, health weakens, dreams collapse, and suddenly people realize how fragile the things of this world truly are. Yet what appears to be destruction may actually become liberation. For many spend their lives leaning upon temporary things that could never truly sustain them. And only when those things fall away do they begin to cling fully to God. This is why some of the most transformed souls emerge from seasons they once prayed desperately to escape. Looking back, they realize the valley changed them more profoundly than the mountaintop ever did. The valley stripped away pride. It revealed hidden fears. It exposed idols of the heart. It forced them to seek God not merely for blessings, but for Himself. And in that seeking, they encountered depths of grace they would otherwise never have known. There is also another mystery hidden within suffering. Pain has a way of enlarging the soul. A person who has never suffered deeply often struggles to understand the wounds of others. But those who have wept bitterly themselves begin to recognize sorrow in the eyes of strangers. Their hearts soften, compassion grows, mercy deepens. They no longer speak lightly about battles they cannot see. They understand that every human being carries hidden burdens, and through this painful process, the soul becomes more capable of reflecting the tenderness of God Himself. Some of you have spent so long fighting silent battles that you have forgotten what peace feels like. Anxiety has become so familiar that calmness seems almost unnatural. Disappointment has lingered so persistently that hope itself feels dangerous. You fear hoping again because previous hopes ended in heartbreak, and yet even now, God is gently calling you not to abandon faith. Not because your pain was imaginary, but because your story is not finished. The enemy often attacks hardest when breakthrough is closest. Darkness grows most desperate before dawn arrives because night senses its time is ending. There are moments when life becomes especially heavy precisely because something significant is shifting in the unseen realm. The soul interprets intensified struggle as proof of abandonment, while heaven sees it as evidence that chains are beginning to break. Think of how storms behave in nature. Before a great storm finally passes, winds often intensify. Thunder grows louder. Rain falls harder. The violence increases before calmness returns. And many people make the mistake of believing the worsening storm means destruction is certain, when in reality it may indicate the storm is nearing its conclusion. In the same way, some of the fiercest battles occur just before remarkable transformation enters a person's life. You may not realize it now, but there are things within you that could only be birthed through adversity. Courage is not formed in safety. Patience is not developed in immediate gratification. Perseverance cannot exist without resistance. Faith itself cannot grow unless circumstances require trust beyond visible evidence. And because these qualities matter eternally, God sometimes values their formation more than temporary comfort. The world constantly chases ease, but heaven is shaping souls for eternity. And eternity measures success differently than human culture does. Earth celebrates outward appearance while heaven examines inward character. Earth admires power while heaven treasures humility. Earth rewards popularity while heaven honors faithfulness. Many people who appear victorious outwardly remain inwardly empty because they never allowed suffering to transform them. But some who walk through tremendous pain emerge carrying wisdom, peace, and spiritual depth that no earthly success could ever purchase. There are prayers being answered right now in ways you do not yet recognize. Sometimes God answers by changing circumstances suddenly. Other times He answers by changing you gradually. Both are miracles. A person who once lived in constant fear, but now walks with quiet trust, has experienced a miracle. A heart once consumed by bitterness, but now capable of forgiveness, has experienced a miracle. A soul that nearly gave up but somehow found strength to continue has experienced a miracle. Too often people overlook these quieter victories because they expect God only in dramatic moments. Yet heaven frequently works through slow transformation, day by day unseen see. Hanges occur. Wounds begin healing, perspective deepens, strength increases, and though progress may feel invisible at times, something sacred is unfolding beneath the surface. The caterpillar likely experiences its cocoon as confinement, not understanding it is actually transformation. If it judged solely by present discomfort, it might conclude destruction was occurring. Yet within that hidden process, wings are forming. Something entirely new is emerging, and many souls misinterpret their cocoon season because they cannot yet perceive what God is creating within them. There are seasons when you feel buried beneath pressure, buried beneath disappointment, buried beneath uncertainty. But perhaps you are not buried at all. Perhaps you are planted. Seeds disappear into darkness before growth begins. And while buried beneath the soil, they appear lifeless to anyone observing from above. Yet hidden within them is extraordinary potential waiting for the appointed time to emerge. You are closer to breakthrough than your emotions sometimes allow you to believe. The human heart often measures reality according to feelings, but feelings are unreliable interpreters of divine activity. Here were days you felt abandoned while God was protecting you. There were moments you felt forgotten while heaven was arranging future blessings beyond your understanding. There were delays that seemed cruel until later events revealed they were merciful. One of the hardest truths for the soul to accept is that God's timing rarely matches human urgency. We cry out for immediate relief because pain feels unbearable in the present moment. Yet God sees consequences extending far beyond what we can imagine. He understands connections between events invisible to us. He knows which opportunities would ultimately harm us and which delays are necessary for our protection. And though his timing can feel mysterious, it is never careless. The cross itself once appeared like complete defeat. Those who witnessed it saw humiliation, suffering, and apparent failure. Hope seemed extinguished. Darkness covered the land. Yet what looked like defeat was actually the doorway to unimaginable victory. And many times in life, God continues to work through patterns that resemble this mystery. Situations that appear hopeless become the birthplace of redemption. Endings become beginnings. Death gives way to resurrection. There are dreams you thought had died forever that God still holds in his hands. There are promises you stopped believing because too much time has passed. There are desires buried beneath layers of disappointment. Yet heaven is not limited by human timelines. What appears impossible to man remains entirely possible to God. He restores what seemed ruined. He rebuilds what appeared destroyed. He revives hope in hearts that nearly surrendered to despair. But restoration often begins internally before it becomes visible externally. God heals the soul before he changes circumstances, because wounded hearts cannot fully sustain the blessings they seek. A person carrying deep bitterness will sabotage peace. A person ruled by fear will struggle to embrace opportunity. And so God lovingly works within us first, even when we impatiently focus only upon outward changes. Some of the people listening have endured suffering so prolonged that they secretly wonder whether joy will ever feel natural again. They have carried grief for so many years that heaviness seems woven into their identity. Yet sorrow was never meant to become your permanent home. Pain may visit your life, It was not created to rule your destiny forever. There is healing greater than your wounds. There is peace stronger than your anxiety. There is hope more enduring than your disappointment. Even now, heaven is moving in ways beyond your comprehension. Doors are opening that you cannot yet see. Paths are forming beneath circumstances that once seemed immovable. Divine appointments are being arranged. Strength is rising within you. And though the process may feel slow, every season of faithfulness matters. Every prayer matters. Every tear matters. Nothing surrendered to God is ever wasted. There are also battles you survived that you still underestimate. The enemy wanted certain experiences to destroy your faith completely. Yet somehow you remain standing. Wounded perhaps, exhausted perhaps, but still standing. That alone is evidence of grace sustaining you. Human strength would have collapsed entirely beneath certain burdens, yet God carried you through moments you never imagined surviving. Do not despise the person you became through hardship. You may mourn the innocence you lost, but there is also wisdom you gained. There is depth within you now that did not exist before. Here is discernment, resilience, and spiritual understanding that suffering helped awaken. And though the journey wounded you, it also revealed strengths you never knew were hidden inside your soul. One day the very struggles that caused you to question everything may become the testimony that strengthens others. The comfort you longed for in your darkest nights may eventually flow through you into the lives of hurting people around you. God often transforms wounded souls into vessels of healing because those who have suffered deeply understand broken hearts in ways others cannot. So even now, while answers remain incomplete and the road ahead still contains uncertainties, refuse to believe that your suffering has been meaningless. Refuse to believe that heaven has forgotten you. Refuse to interpret temporary darkness as permanent defeat. The story is still unfolding. The process is still working. And the same God who carried you through every previous storm is still guiding your life with wisdom far beyond what you can presently understand. For the day is coming when what once felt like unbearable struggle will reveal itself as the very ground upon which God built your strength, your faith, your endurance, and your victory. And when that moment arrives, you will see that even in the seasons when you felt most abandoned, heaven had never stopped working for you, shaping you, protecting you, and preparing you for far greater things than you could see while walking through the fire. And perhaps that is the greatest truth the suffering soul must finally learn. God was never absent in the storm. He was there in every tear you cried, in every silent prayer whispered through the darkness, in every moment you thought you had no strength left to continue. The pain was real, the heartbreak was real, the waiting was real, but none of it was without purpose. For while you believed you were merely surviving, heaven was transforming you. While you mourned what was lost, God was preparing what was coming. While you feared the fire would consume you, it was instead refining you into someone stronger, wiser, deeper, and closer to Him than ever before. So do not allow the sorrow of yesterday to convince you that tomorrow holds no promise. Do not let the scars of your struggle blind you to the beauty of your future. The same God who carried you through the valley will also carry you through. So lead you into victory. The same hands that held you together in your weakest hour are the hands now opening doors no man can shut. Your season of pain was not the end of your story. It was the breaking of the ground before the harvest. It was the long night before the dawn. It was the furnace before the gold emerged shining. And one day you will stand in a place of peace you once thought impossible. You will breathe with joy where you once wept with grief. You will look back upon the ruins of your former suffering and realize that God was building something eternal in you all along. The struggle that nearly destroyed you will become the testimony that reveals His faithfulness. The wounds you carried will become proof that grace kept you alive. And the very season that made you question everything will ultimately become the season that taught you to trust God more completely than ever before. For your pain had a purpose, and now, in ways seen and unseen, God is turning your struggle into victory.